Folks, now we're going to be introducing our next speakers. But before we do, I want to give a little background on why I'm so excited to have Alex and the Verizon team join us. If you don't know it, if you've never heard of the Verizon DBIR, this is the industry's most respected data-driven report on incidents and breaches. What happened, they've been doing this for about 13, 14 years now, started by Wade Baker many years ago. And what the Verizon team does is they go around the world and they collect data on thousands of incidents and breaches globally from every industry. They then take all this data, analyze it, and then publish it in a free report on what are the top risks we should be concerned about. Now, what makes this report so valuable compared to others is A, it's vendor neutral. There's nothing for them to sell. They're just trying to provide actionable data for you to act on. Two, they not only look at deliberate threat actors like cyber attackers and cyber criminals, but quite often incidents and breaches are driven by human error, accidents, things like that, which they include. And that is so often forgotten. But one of the key takeaways here is how data-driven they are. Far too often, we make decisions about cybersecurity based on emotion. We want to use data to drive the decisions we make. Remember the opening talk? One of the things I did is I emphasized to move out of just the entertainment business, we need to get into the risk business. And to do that, we need to know what risks to be worried about. And these folks, I strongly feel, are the world experts all about how to manage human risk. I'm just going to share with you one quick story demonstrating how valuable the Verizon DBIR is. All right, folks, I'm going to ask you a question and just think about it. In 2013, the Verizon DBIR released a report about infected mobile devices. In 2018, they released something similar, and last year they touched on it also. I'm going to ask you a question. In 2013 and 2018, the Verizon DBIR team analyzed over 30 million mobile devices. 30 million. Now think for a moment. Out of those 30 million mobile devices they looked at, and remember, they're a service provider. That's how they can look. What percentage of mobile devices do you think were infected? Do you think it was 20%, 40%, 80% of mobile devices? Think of that number just for a moment. In 2013 and 2018, they found something similar. Less than 1% of mobile devices were infected. And it continues to this day. It's actually really, really hard to infect a mobile device. Turns out about the only mobile devices that nowadays are infected are either really old, outdated Android devices, and somebody installed a Trojan mobile app from an unauthorized, dodgy website, or you're that 0.1% that's targeted by the KGB or some nation state, and they really, really want to hack you, and they're willing to spend $500,000 on an exploit to get into your mobile device. Turns out it's actually really hard to infect mobile devices. And mobile device security experts like Heather, who just spoke, Chris Cohen, or others will help emphasize this. So what did the report identify? One of the biggest risks with mobile devices? It's not infection, but it's actually losing them or having them stolen. In fact, you're far more likely to lose a mobile device than have it stolen. And you're far more likely to have it stolen than have it infected. So what's interesting is emotion may tell you, ooh, mobile devices, really easy to infect. But then when you get their data set from Verizon, it's like, no, actually, they're really, really hard to infect. Don't take my word for it. Go back to your organization, talk to your security team, talk to the DFIR team, the forensics folks, talk to physical security and ask, hey, security team, in the past 6 months or the past year, how many of our employees' mobile devices have been infected? It'll probably be this much. How many of our mobile devices have been lost or stolen? And it'll probably be this much. So here we are running around telling people, don't get your mobile device infected. install antivirus, when really the biggest risk to mobile devices is me and you losing them, forgetting them at a restaurant or stuff like that. And that's why I love the Verizon DBIR. They cut through all of the emotion, they cut through all the noise and go, hey, based on the data we have, this is what you should be worried about. But they're really, really good at calling out, hey, maybe the data is not perfect. This is how we analyzed it. This is what the gaps may be. They know they're not perfect, and they're very good at calling out where there may be issues. So it's a fantastic resource. And the reason I'm all bringing this up, if we are going to manage human risk, we need to better understand what those top risks are. And these are probably the world experts at understanding at a global level the risks and the human risks that are involved. So that's why I've invited Alex and team to help brief us on their latest 2021 report. If you read the 2021 DBIR, Data Breach and Incident Report, these are the actual authors. If you haven't had a chance to read it, I highly recommend you do. The report is free. It is a fantastic resource. All right, folks, so what I'm going to do now is ask Alex to go ahead and take the lead. He's going to introduce you to the Verizon, but he's also going to introduce you to the key findings they found this year, but from a human lens. So they're focusing on the human side of their findings. Alex, thank you so much for joining us. The show is all yours.
It's a pleasure to be here. And again, I had a whole spiel put together about what DBIR is and how. Well, but I don't have to do it anymore. Lance did such a fantastic job, right? Thank you so much, and thanks everyone who's listening, right? And for joining us on this little short data-driven journey on how can we try to quantify the human risk, right? So I want to talk a little bit about this aspect of human risk, right? That we started measuring on for this last report, right? And again, like Lance was saying, right, it's something we've been doing for 14 years, right? What we do in a nutshell is we talk to a lot of different companies whose job is to either build security products or to actually do the instant response activities when someone is breached, right? So more often than not, when a breach happens, hire someone and they will go in, they will clean it up, figure out what happened, clean it up, right? There's a report issued, right? And then we are able to, we have a partnership with those companies where they provide us some of the high level details on what's happened. We never know who the customer was, but we do know which specific industry they were in, which country they were located at, right? And some graphics like company size, but I mean, not to a huge extent, right? So that allows us to have a sort of a mostly unbiased view of what's really going on, right? Because we have all these different companies who target different segments and even target different sizes of companies. Some of them are more focused on mid-market. Some of them are really working with the big enterprise guys, right? And so it's a work, I mean, we kind of make it seem easy when you see the report, but imagine going through 83 different databases and harmonizing them and making sure they are using kind of the same standard and thought process around classifying things. So this last year we had over 5,000 breaches, right? And one of the results that we brought, right, and the reason why I'm here talking to you is on the next slide. So the main, and this is one of the results we brought, that 85% of breaches, they were involved some sort of the human element, right? And what that means, and we'll get into more detail what that means, right, is that there was a human involved in the process, right? We're going to go into that definition, but I think this was something that really brought a lot of people's attention, into the report, because if only we could find a consistent way to address those, right? Look at the potential benefit, right? If 85% of the things, of the problems that we have could be addressed or could be mitigated, right? Look, there is an enormous potential gain here, right, of what we could potentially do, right? In contrast, right, everybody's talking about the 0 days and even the, mass exploitation on the internet. Only 3% of the breaches that we found actually involve some sort of vulnerability exploitation, right? Those, again, those things do happen. 3% of 5,000 is significant, right? It's not something you can just ignore. And of course, this is just a small sample of what's actually happening, right? We can't lose sight of that. But with such a difference in your perspective, there's such a difference on the numbers and the quantities there. It doesn't matter how much data, it doesn't matter really by the level of data we're collecting. This really is a sound statistical result, right? Okay, there is a difference here, and human element seems to be more important than vulnerability exploitation to what we're trying to do, right? So before I explain, and I want to explain to you and dig into what this result means, right? And how do we break it down inside the DBIR structure, right? Because some of you are experts on some aspects of what does this huge universe means, right? And I want to make sure you're able to see where your specific strengths lie, right? And the work that you're trying to do, where's the data for this lies. So before we go into explaining to you what it is, right? What this is, this definition, I'm gonna go a little bit into how we classify our breaches, right? Just to bring you some context. So can we move to the next slide, please? So we use a standard to classify the breaches in the DBIR. We call it VERIS, right? So every time you see something written in the DBIR as in, hey, this was a social attack, right? Or this was an error, right? There's actually, we're not just using those words, there's actually a whole definition behind all those different things, right? And in a nutshell, what we have is the 4 A's, as we call it. So it's what was the asset that was impacted, right? And by that we mean, was it a server? Was it a workstation? Was it a mobile device, as Linz was just saying, right? One of the types of assets that we have are people, right? Because when you think about it, a phishing attack or a business email compromise, right? The actual target, the actual asset that's being targeted is the person, right, who is responding to the email, right? So that's one of the ways we're able to again, separate and slice and dice and make sure we understand precisely where the force is being applied on, if that makes sense, right? Obviously the action, right, which means what happened, right? So was it a phishing attack? Was it some sort of malware? Was it a tornado, right? We do have a whole segment of environmental types of actions, which don't get used that often, thankfully, right? But we have to take those things into consideration, right? Obviously the actor, right? And this is really, and like Len said, we're not really concerned, right? Which one of the myriad nation state agencies are after you, but we just try to do some rough classifications as in, oh, was this an internal or external attack? Was this an organized crime? Looks like organized crime. Does it look like something that was nation affiliated, right? Just again, to give some color and give some structure around those things, right? And finally, the attribute of the incident, right? And the attribute is which one of the attributes of the CIA triad, the confidentiality, integrity, or availability was impacted. So if you think about a DDoS attack, that's the action. The asset was maybe your network device that's handling your internet connection, and the attribute would have been availability. That was the one that was affected, right? So the trick, all that we do in the DBIR, it's actually fairly simple, right? Is classify everything we have on those axes, so to speak, right? Some of the breach information we have doesn't have all four, but they have three of them, right? So even if there's not a whole level of detail, right, we can keep tallying up on those dimensions, and at the end of the day, right, we're able to run comparisons against those and statistics against those, right? So can we move to the next slide, please? So again, these are some more examples, right? So, and this is specifically about actions. We're going to be talking a lot about actions, right? Actions is the easiest way to classify, it's the easiest way to talk about things, because we're really, when we're talking about controls, right, we usually tie them back to actions, because again, you're trying to counteract quite literally something that's happening, right? So using the actions as our anchor for discussion really, I think, really helps clarify what we're trying to do, right? So a couple of examples from this year's DBIR, right? We have hacking, right, and social as the top ones. And hacking, just to be clear, right, what we mean by this is hands behind keyboard activity, right? There's actually someone, in contrast with a malware, which is doing autonomous exploitation or compromise on your device. On the hacking piece, we actually have someone behind the keyboard doing something, right? Social, I think it's self-explanatory. We're going to be talking a little bit about social today. Error, which is one that Lance highlighted as well, right? And one of the things I just want to call out here very quickly, right? We're going to be seeing a few of those things. See how error is roughly the same size as malware, right? Again, what do we get on the news? What do we get an outsized focus on? It's the malware piece, right? And again, I'm not saying ransomware is not a thing. We have a whole slide about ransomware on this human element talk, right? Believe it or not. But look, error is there. Are we putting as much effort in controlling against error, right? Or providing specific guardrails and awareness to people as we are with malware, right? It's really something to think about, right? And the more specific view on the actions, right? All the actions are subdivided as you can see there, right? So phishing as a part of social was the top action this year, right? And the second one was use of stolen credentials, which obviously has a very close relationship with phishing as well, right? But not all credentials come out of phishing, but it's still significant, right? Ransomware on number 3 there, and we're gonna get there. So anyway, very rough view, very high level view of Veris. So I guess we can talk about what do we call the human element? No, actually, before we do that, can we move to the next slide? There's an example, right? Just very quickly, again, just how all those things look together, like the attributes, like this is a simple misconfiguration. Somebody made a mistake, right? So the actor you can see on the bottom left is internal, right? So it was someone from the company. It was a system admin, and there was no motive. They didn't intend to do it at all, right? It just happened. They didn't stay, right? The action there, you can see error. The variety is misconfiguration. I mean, they configured something wrong. Maybe they had something not, they didn't put a password on the database that's facing the internet, right? And it was carelessness, the vector, right? And it was on a database, the database was on the cloud. So you can see where we get there, right? And this is the kind of stuff we're tracking. I guess this is enough for the example, I think. So let's get to the meat of the human element. Can you please move to the next slide? So this is how we see the world, right? In the sense of the exploring our database, right? And this is some code. It looks like pseudocode, but this is actually the code that we use, right? And it's meant to, even if you're not a very, I mean, there is a lot of data science on our team, but not everybody's a data scientist for them to look at this. So before I lose everybody on the call, can we please just move to the next slide, and we can have an annotated version that I think will be more helpful, right? So look, the part on yellow there, right? We want instance from the 2021 DBIR, right? And the green one means data disclosure, yes. So this was a breach. We know the data was disclosed, right? So then we go into the next line, which is a very big line, where we are creating what is the human element for us. So the ones in blue, you can see actor internal, action misuse, and misuse for us is your more traditional insider threat kind of action, right? Social, self-explanatory, error, self-explanatory, and asset variety person, which was something I also mentioned before, right? So the ones in blue are the actions traditionally associated with humans, right? Or the human element, or things that would impact or involve someone from inside your company, right? On the other hand, we're bringing visibility to two other things, right? The ones in gray are all malware delivery vectors, right? Where there is human interaction in order for the specific action, the specific malware to be made available in the system, right? So in our view, right, in our analysis, these are all very important things that we should be analyzing as far as the broad impact of the human intervention there, right? And finally, the one in pink is use of stolen credentials, right? Credentials are very ubiquitous and they're very frequently the target of a phishing attack. So this one on the credentials one, and if I'm gonna be fair with all of you, right? This one is a little bit of a stretch in some ways that we're doing, but because when someone uses a stolen credential, it could be the result of phishing, or it could be a result of credential stuffing, let's say, right? So in the sense that there was another website that was compromised, and actually those credentials were not obtained by interacting with a human, right? But they were obtained by credential stuffing, right? However, we believe given the prevalence we have on phishing, right, on a lot of those on our database as of today, right, and also how so many of the attacks that we have, we never really have the starting point figured out, right? So people come in and they do the analysis, and the first thing they see is that someone used the stolen credentials, and there's a huge question mark: where did those credentials come from, right? And so look, it's a fair assumption that there was a human involvement here on some of when some of those credentials were lost, right? Credentials is a big deal, and it continues to be a big deal. We're going to have a slide just for credentials. Anyway, can we move to the next slide, please? So let's talk about the traditional human stuff, right? And they have always been a very relevant component of the data set, right? And we can see here, this is all the actions, right? The ones in gray, we don't need to matter. We don't need to concern ourselves about. Those are the other ones, environmental and physical. We're not going to be talking about those this time, but you can see them color-coded: misuse, error, and social, right? You can see the huge spike in social that has been happening, right? We do believe partially this has to do a little bit with how everybody had to, a large percentage of the workforce had to move to remote work, right? And also cognitive load, right? There's a lot of things we wrote about in the report actually about this, right? But you can see the impact there. You can see it growing. Error has always been stable, right? And the reason why error has always been kind of stable, always around the high 10s or lower 20s, has to do with maybe there's not a huge dent we're being able to do there, right? And misuse has always been again a thing, but it's reducing a little bit versus the impact of social, right? So before you folks think there's a problem in your monitor there, the chart is moving, right? And this is one of the ways that we represent the uncertainty that we have in these data points, right? This is the kind of the statistical strength that we have. But you see those things are fairly stable, even though like social narrow, they cross a little bit with the other two, right? We're not comparing against those, we're just comparing them against the bigger picture. Can we go to the next slide, please? So obviously social is a big deal, right? And phishing was specifically present on more than a third of the breaches on our data set this year, right? Last year, it was a quarter, it was 25%, right? And now we're talking about 36, right? And I mean, many people way smarter than me and way more versed in this have presented their analysis on why those things are happening, and how the prevalence of social actions are growing, right? But honestly, from our perspective and from the way that we see the world here in the DBIR, the reason they're growing is because they work, right? It's as simple as that, right? So business email compromise, it's not quite phishing in our data set. It's usually under pretexting, right? Which is a different sub-action, but they have been doubling over the past 2 years, right? And the main reason is because it's such a cheap attack to make, right? And you don't need any real technical understanding, right? And of course, there are degrees of preparation that you do for that, but it's just so damn effective, right? And that, of course, translates in the growth that we see. And business email compromise specifically is one that we're not gonna be like eating our hats next year if I make a prediction that it's gonna continue to grow, maybe even double next year again. This is a very easy bet from the trends that we're seeing, right? And from the fact that there hasn't really been any, at least that we're aware of, any concerted effort in trying to address this. Can we go to the next one, please? So credentials, as I said, is a big deal. 61% of all breaches involve some sort of credential data, right? And error-based ones usually leak more credential data, right? Which might increases our pool of credential data in the wild, so to speak. So that might affect things as well, right? And they're everywhere, right? The scary thing about credentials is that in every kind of action that we track that could have credentials as a part of it, right? Credentials are there. They almost saturated the space that they can go to. So again, this is a very easy win as far as if you can focus on protecting those credentials, right? And again, there is a lot of that on the social and the phishing I mentioned before. It's something that it's an improvement that we can make. Can we go to the next one, please? So errors, right? Again, another example, I have some statistics here, right? And with errors have been growing year over year, but last year there was a decline, right? Even though they grew numerically, right? But the real thing is that social and phishing grew so much last year, right, that they actually overshadowed errors, right? We don't think people are better at preventing errors from happening. We just think there's a lot more phishing and pretexting going on. That's all there's to it. Next one, please. Misuse, right? Again, misuse is another example where the percentage is decreasing, right? And but it's still very much a concern, right? This is one of the things that we usually focus when we're talking about the DBIR. Like there is a lot of energy expended into, the internal threat, the malicious insider. If you separate the concept of the malicious insider as someone from the internal environment, someone who is an employee or a contractor, which actually have malicious intent, from oh no, they got someone's password and I cannot detect them, right? If you separate those two concepts, because for us, the one that the external hacker, the external attacker that had access to this and it's moving like an insider, that's an external, then this is a hacking activity. This is not misuse, right? Misuse is actually pretty low. I know it's very painful to deal with, right? It's something that involves a lot of thorough investigation. A lot of energy is expended on companies, right? But it's actually not that frequent on the large scale of things. Can we go to the next one, please? Oh, I think you made a double there. I think you did two. There we go. So, and finally, I want to talk about the gray one that we were just mentioning, right? Which is the human execution chain, right? So, I mean, it's kind of like there used to be a joke. I used to do a lot of SANS presentations around for the DFIR crowd, and we had a joke there that you could never go into a presentation without mentioning a pyramid, or at least the David Bianco pyramid of pain. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this, but it's a very common staple for the DFIR folks, right? The sad reality is that you cannot have a conversation about security today without talking about ransomware, even though it's kind of tangential, right? But I guess the point that I'm trying to make here, it's not as tangential as people would think, right? Because, I mean, ransomware was 10% of breaches in 2020, right? That we were tracking, right? Huge increase, right? And I mean, if we have a look around this year, it's not stopping. It's also getting worse. It's one of those types of attacks that we track on the DBIR that we see as very profitable, and the return on investment is very high, right? And now it's easier than ever. Anyway, I'm not going to go into the kind of the market value chain analysis here, but the point I want to make to you folks is that 16% of those ransomware were provably caused is the wrong word, but there was a human in the process there, right? Where someone clicked on something clicked on an email attachment, right? It was on an email, or it was downloaded by some sort of malware, right? That maybe had a previous tab. So you could, if you believe those numbers, right? And these are very conservative numbers, and I'm going to tell you why, right? Just by the effort that we're doing on awareness, right? We're also potentially mitigating those, because to be fair, right? They have to get in somehow. So somehow the access to the environment has to be got, right? Has to be acquired in order for the deployment to happen. So we have one that usually always wins, and it's winning here on this specific last year, which is direct install, right? Which means, okay, all that we know is that someone was in the machine and they installed the malware there, right? But then more often than not, the question, how did they get into that server or that machine, is left unanswered, right? Again, like I said, the IR process, right? And again, it's not their fault in the sense that it is a very hard thing to do. They'll mostly focus on containment and figuring out what was the patient zero, so to speak, right? And sometimes they cannot go to the, okay, what was the root cause, right? Sometimes we get the result, but when we don't, it leaves this open door. Okay, they direct installed, and maybe they went through a VPN connection to get to that machine, but how did they get the credentials, right? And again, we're circling back to credentials, right? There's a lot unanswered, right? On where those credentials come from and how do people get access to those machines. But again, if we look at the data that we have, right, it looks a lot like those people are being phished and their credentials are being taken, and then someone gets in and installs ransomware. I cannot tell you that that's the truth, right? I don't have this data, but it really feels like it, right? And so I think this is an important data point, right? Especially when people are like, oh no, we shouldn't be, I mean, I can imagine, I have been in enough budget conversations, right? Where, oh no, we shouldn't be spending money on this. We should actually be spending money on protecting ransomware. This is protecting against ransomware, making sure people are prepared to deal with this, right? Making sure there's a sort of a response plan, tabletop analysis on how do we respond to this. This is ransomware prevention as well. And it's ransomware prevention maybe on the earliest possible moment, right? You can try to protect against it. So can we go to the next one, please? So I definitely am not going to spend time here talking about what I think the solutions would be, right? I assure you that every single one of you is better at this specific problem space, and what are the potential solutions to this, and what are the processes we should follow, right? But I'm going to leave you with some obvious takeaways here, right? From our perspective, again, looking at the data, is that, look at 85% versus 3%, right? It's clearly easier to work on the 25% from an attacker's perspective, right? It's clearly easier to go on the human element than to exploit a vulnerability. Like, how can we rebalance this, right? How can we make attackers will always optimize the highest return? How can we make potentially breaching people as hard, or at least harder than it is today, as it's breaching systems, to try to rebalance this equation a little bit, right? And I do want to take this opportunity to share some of the work that my colleagues. They're not even real colleagues because they're Verizon Media. I call them work cousins, right? They have been doing on their, and these are the internal security folks there. They have been doing an incredible job on behavioral engineering of their teams, right? And putting some very creative OKRs together, right? As far as how do we really measure success here, or try to measure success in here, right? One of the results we had in this year's DBIR was from one of our partners, right? Which is again one of our partners who is very well versed in this space, right? And they had data that showed that even on companies that had maybe they were acing their phishing simulation tests, right? They had 0 people clicking on the phishing simulation. There was still around the vicinity of 3% clicking on actual phishing, right? So the point of this is not that, oh, phishing simulation doesn't work. It actually is very effective, but there are diminishing returns, right? This is not an area, and again, I don't think this is a problem that you guys suffer as much as everyone suffers in security. This is not a one and done. There's no silver bullets. You can't just do one thing and just like clean your hands and okay, I'm done, right? A lot of work needs to be done, a lot of different strategies, right? And again, I believe you're going to be hearing a lot on this summit about different techniques and different ideas from very smart people who have been thinking a lot about this problem for a very long time. So just move to the next slide. We're done. I want to thank you very much. This is a bunch of resources. Of course, the DBIR itself there, if you haven't had a chance to read it. I mean, come for the data analysis and stay for the very bad jokes us failed comedians do, right, on the report. And a lot of information about Veris, if you folks are interested in learning a little bit more, right? And we also have a community database, right? We cannot share with you the data we get from our partners, of course, right? But we have an open source project that is sponsored by Verizon where everything, I mean, we try as much as we can. Things that are in the media, we code it as Veris, and then it's available for everyone. And that's it. Thank you. I want to thank you very much for the time, and I hope you enjoyed kind of this this rough data here that I believe it's going to be helpful when you guys are trying to make the case on why the work that you do, the work that's done here for when it is important, it will bring results, right?
Alex, thank you so much. Now, I just have one quick question. First, folks, that opening slide that Alex showed, 85% of breaches involve the human, less than 3% involve actual vulnerability exploitation. If your organization is taking a purely technical lens, we're not truly addressing that other 85%. But Alex, one other question, and an individual asked it, and it was a great question. Okay, you threw a lot of great information at us. What's the key takeaway? And after reading the Verizon DBIR for so many years, my key takeaway is this, and I would like for you to confirm it, deny it, modify it. My key takeaway from all of your folks' great work is the top 2 human risks we should be concerned about is A, phishing, B, passwords, and then maybe human error down there as a close third or something like that. But if I'm an awareness officer and I don't know where to start with phishing and passwords based on your data. Good, bad, kinda?
No, that's pretty much it. That's pretty much it. And the phishing and passwords are very close friends, as you can imagine, right?
Phishing for passwords.
Correct. That's usually how it goes. The interesting thing about credentials, in my opinion, not in my opinion, but I think you can analyze that. There are actually you can do a two-pronged approach there, right? Because of course there is the awareness of, as a part of a phishing attack, please don't put your passwords in places you don't fully trust. But there is the other side of the more technical part of the deal where, enable 2FA, right? And stuff like that. That also helps a lot. But again, making sure people are aware of the value and being able to understand, okay, is this a place I should be putting my password? Is this a place I should be putting my password? This real my SSO portal, right? It's obviously a huge part of it that can be addressed by the awareness, right?
All right.
processes.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Alex. We're going to take a break in a moment, folks. But first of all, key two takeaways from Alex's talk. One, the vast majority of breaches today involve the human. Only a very, very small percentage are purely technical based attacks, vulnerability exploitation, 3% or less. So security is no longer just a technology issue, as proven by that. And also, based on the data, especially from the last 3 years, if you don't know where to start from a human perspective, start on phishing and passwords.